We are in the business of people.
This is life-changing work.
But at the same time, it needs to be scalable.
Millie and I might both have very different experiences as women of color.
The best thing that we do is definitely finding the common ground for both the organization and the people we're trying to help.
We are also often confronted with our own bias that we have, that we carry. Hello, everyone. This is Mwano with Mwano Consultancy. I have my amazing two colleagues, Victoria and Millie. We are a small but mighty consultant firm that focuses on helping organizations maximize on their positive impact. We are grounded on building authentic relationships. So we're just gonna have a conversation around some of the themes of what we've experienced, like how do we stay neutral? How do we confront our own biases when we're working with our partners? How do we not offend when it comes to standing strong in certain principles that we believe in? Another one we're gonna focus on is how to be consistent, right? The consistency of representing our partners, but also the consistency of representing the community that our partners are trying to reach and strengthen their relationship with. So the first one that we want to start with is being a bridge and a glue between the organizations that we work with. So just to give you a little bit of context, like currently we're working with different partners where we're the bridge, we're the middle people, meaning there is a group of folks in their community that they're trying to get to know and hopefully bridge the relationship so they can provide better services and better alignment. And then it's the organization itself that's hiring us to do the work. Right? And then we're in the middle. So the organization that's hiring us, they have the resources, they reached out to us, they have a problem that they're trying to solve. And then the community is the community that they're trying to enhance and build a relationship with. And then we're the glue. So I'm curious, from some of the work that we are doing now, how do we navigate that? Like, how do we navigate, what is like that fine line between like staying the course, but also being effective for both parties? So I'll start with you first, Millie.
Yeah, I would say the best thing that we do is definitely finding the common ground for both the organization and the people we're trying to help. So finding a way that they can both trust us and understanding what one person is communicating, how can we communicate with the other person in order for them to understand each other but still remaining neutral. So for us, I think that we tend to focus on taking ourselves out of the equation and kind of seeing what is it that they actually mean, and then finding the correct terminology to present it to the other individual.
So you mentioned common ground. I would like to dig deeper to try to figure out, like, how do you, one, identify what the common grounds are amongst different stakeholders, but then which ones are the ones that are like important that you end up driving your work by, right? Because that's like an important part. You say common ground. Some people might hear common ground and they have a different, definition of what common ground is. So what is it for you?
Oh, yes. So I would definitely say the biggest thing is once an organization brings us in, we kind of see what it is that they're trying to do. Once we start to see that is what are the resources that they have in order to accomplish what they're trying to do. So then that is when we will prioritize exactly what it is that we're going to go in and kind of what are we developing a common ground on. Once we have developed that, then we go and we find that they have the common definition, whether it's their vision, mission, or how statement, and like simple definitions such as respect, the 7 principles that we use. As long as they have that as a common ground, which means like they have the same definitions, they see that this word means this word, not like respect means just to not talk to you if I don't like you, but instead like we communicate in a proper way. And then once we have developed that, then we can go on and know that that is the set common ground.
Great. Thank you for elaborating on that. So it sounds like even you're going as far as like putting definition on what those important things that they've identified are. So then there's an understanding going forward that this is how you've defined it, and then this is how we're going to go about. So thank you for sharing that. And I think it's really important to have that clarity, because sometimes you might have like a high level definition of something, but you don't really know what it means in relation to the partner. So from what Millie was saying, it's really important for us as DMC when we're working with our partners to make sure that we have clarity, that we're not just running with our own assumption what it means, and then keep them grounded on that and then moving forward with it. So I'm going to go to my next colleague, Victoria. being so new, right? And there's been so much that you've had to learn in a very short period of time. What have you observed in terms of like being on the ground, right? Because with DMC, some of our work is there's a lot of planning, strategy, right, alignment, right, and then we try very hard to be in person, right, understanding what the partners are actually doing and what they're going through, what their experience is like. And within the last month and a half, you've actually been able to go on the ground. So I'm curious, from your perspective, how was it for you learning about these partners almost virtually, not almost, but yeah, literally virtually through interviews and Zoom calls, but then getting the opportunity to actually go physically to see the partners and the different thing that they're doing? How has that been for you?
It's been really inspiring because it's a completely different narrative when you're standing in front of somebody and when you're seeing, because you're able to really feel the space. You're able to feel what somebody values, because that's like, I think, Millie was discussing about commonalities and finding those connectors sometimes is having conversations with what do you value, what's important to you, and then you can kind of pull from that what's important and where are those connectors, right? And so it was one thing when we would interview over Zoom and we would kind of hear, that like kind of box narrative of, the checking of the boxes, or a lot of times if organizations are used to getting grants or funding, the stuff on paper that they have to kind of say, that very logical space, but then you go and you visit somebody in person and that's where you get the really emotional space. That's really where you get the connection, where you get the holistic, and you're really able to say, wow, this is life-changing work, that this work that people are doing, while on paper, we know it's impactful, but then we see it and we can feel it and like we can rally around it. And I think that that's the exciting part, because then it gets me excited or us excited, and then we can communicate that to our partners and say, hey, like, we're really excited. These are the names and the faces and like some of the stories that are of people that wouldn't have the same opportunities without this partner. And it's creating equity, it's creating space.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And again, for our audience and our listeners, it's really important to kind of understand the different responsibility DMC has when we're working with different partners, right? So a community partner wants to accomplish something, right? Or they want to improve their reach or their relationship with different stakeholders. They hire us to come in to create the plan and implement the strategy to be the glue. So we go out, first we do the preliminary work, some interviews, we might have a set of questions that we send ahead of time, and that's very linear, right? So it might be a Zoom thing, it might be a survey thing, and then the next thing that we do, we don't just sit on kind of the initial data that we gather about the organization. The next thing that we do, we try to be in person, right? Visiting, being on site, visiting a program, a service, or an initiative, or an event that they're doing. And by doing that, it gives us the opportunity to see the realism of the work that's being done. And then through those experiences, it tells a more holistic story of what those partners are actually doing on the ground. And then we take that informs our observation and analysis of the partner, and then we bring it to the people that hired us to do the work in order to help them understand what they can do in order to strengthen their relationships. So that's awesome. That's great. But along the way, there's times when things that we observe, that we see, that might not be under the scope of the project, that we might feel compelled to want to elevate or engage with, right? Because we are an organization that focuses on helping organizations maximize on their positive impact, but it's their positive impact, right? It's not our objective that we're coming in to do. So what happens when we come in and all of a sudden we get to see more than what the scope of work is, right? Or how do we maybe make an exception and elevate something that we witnessed or experienced or new knowledge that we found out? How have you seen us navigate that?
I would say, for example, one of our partners we saw after looking at the full scope of all their organization, we found that a specific, I guess, department was, in a sense, having a bit of more fault, not fault, but like difficulties having that more positive impact to their employees. So for us, we were able to kind of communicate with the organization that brought us in and show them through the analysis and data that we gather, like, hey, we might need to be able to focus on this area first in order for us to build up more of the organization. So what we did is, working with that organization, we've developed different tools for them and provided them resources, as well as helped them ground themselves in order for them to know that they can do it too, even whilst we're doing it, so that further on they can do it themselves.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And that's something that we always wrestle with at times, because going into many of the projects that we are working on, we know even if our partners have hired us have identified 3 or 4 things, that when we go in, if they give us an opportunity to be on the ground level, we're going to uncover maybe 20 things, right? And coming back in that collaboration and being able to represent the voices of those that they're trying to reach seems to be kind of the secret sauce for DMC, right? Because at that point, again, it's not about us, it's about what we've learned to elevate. So thank you for sharing that. I'm curious from you, Victoria, as you've gotten acclimated and you see the different tools that we use internally, right, to try to be, innovative, proactive, try to be authentic, right? Because we are in the business of people, right? But at the same time, it needs to be scalable, right? So I'm curious from you, what have you learned and have experienced thus far that you, being an outsider, not being at DMC initially, and then coming in and seeing the different tools and techniques and strategies and platforms that we utilize, that you might be surprised of? And I'm just curious from your standpoint.
Yeah, I am really surprised at how collaborative yet, balanced we are as a team. And so thinking like Millie and I, for example, Millie definitely sets up and is that quarterback and can look at a project from some of that logical angle, but then we can pass off. Like, it's really, a lot of times you work in organizations that say, we're a team, but it's really a team here. And it's really, we come in with respect for everybody's expertise and skills. And I think that that's something that's so huge that helps us kind of be able to look at a project from all the different perspectives, and because we get so many different perspectives, and be able to really just help give our partners the best experience, because how I look at something might differ from the way Millie looks at something, how you'll look at something, but then we're also leaning into the fact and capitalizing and using that fact that we're all going to look at it differently, but then we collaborate and sit and we figure out, it's like we do a big puzzle together and we kind of figure out what piece fits where and what's going to be the best, and we strategize. And I think that that is something that's so amazing. It's not, all the work that we do isn't one-sided, isn't one perspective. We're all doing it all together, even with our different lenses.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Victoria. Now we're going to move to the next topic, which is bias. So we do a lot of work where we're helping organizations understand the different moving parts that contributes in their perspective of how they see the world and how they might show up. But at the same time, we are on the giving side, right? We are also often confronted with our own bias that we have, that we carry. So Millie, this is a question for you. I'm just curious, what have you experienced and seen in this work that have been maybe challenging at times to be able to, one, and this is for you personally, but also just as DMC as a team, the times that we come back to the table and be like, holy crap, we missed it. We projected our own thing, right? If it's from imagery, if it's from whatever it is, right? And I think this is a really important topic, because sometimes as a consultant and strategist group, you always think about what you're doing to solve other people's problem, but you don't really think about like what are you also bringing along. And one of the things that we've realized in many of the work that we do, because we're constantly creating that space to reflect, that there's times that our own biases also gets infused, right? And we have to check ourselves. So how does DMC attempt to stay neutral, right? And what are certain things that DMC constantly put forward in order to make sure that DMC is also checking on its own biases?
Just to get it, are you asking in the sense of, is there any biases that we've confronted and how have we kind of tackled it on?
Yes, in our own work, right?
Yeah.
It could be from like how we wrote a summary or the images that we've put, right? And for like illustrations, right? Like I'm just curious if you can give our listener and our audience kind of the back end of how we also have to constantly check on ourselves.
Yeah, I think an example that comes is having a certain identifiers of diversity that we had on a presentation that we had. And for us, I think that we did not necessarily think of it as that we didn't have all of them, but we were able, like one person actually had came up to us and spoke and said, hey, I see that you have a lot of diversity on here, but you're missing one. But we were able to take that in and be
And which one was it, if you don't mind me asking?
It was disability. So
Yep.
we were missing somebody possibly in a wheelchair or like a physical disability. So we were able to have that conversation with that individual, and then afterwards we were able to come back and say like, hey, we are missing that, and we made those changes in order for us to, I guess not necessarily, but yes it's necessary to remain unbiased, but we took that and were able to make those corrections and like analyze it ourselves. Yeah.
And that was, and this happens frequently too, and I think it's really important for those who are listening to get an understanding of this, because a lot of times when you're doing cultural climate or diversity, equity, and inclusion work, there's the expectation that even the subject matter experts know everything, knows all the trends, they know, but the reality is that's not true. And I think one of the things that's kept us humble and provides humility for us is the fact that we don't do this work assuming that we know everything. And we don't do this work assuming that we're going to do everything 100% right. We make sure that we carve the space to come alongside our partners. So then when opportunities like someone calling us out on a, all employee training that we were doing, when they noticed when we had the slide up with the images of diversity that we didn't have someone in disability represented, right? Visually, right? From, someone in a wheelchair. And when we heard that feedback, like instead of us giving whatever reason that we wanted to give why it wasn't there, it was something that we had to take ownership of. Yeah, we didn't have that there, right? Like we had our, even though we knew that in that image we couldn't have included all the different diversity that might be represented, but it was still an opportunity to make sure that we had that one represented, right? So part of we have a graphic designer, illustrator that works with us. He's incredible. We were able to send a request to him and said, hey, can you update this, right? And then the future trainings that we did, we ended up making sure that it was there. But I think that's a really important thing, because the space of culture, climate, diversity, equity, and inclusion, like it evolves and it moves so fast. Like at one point, one terminology is good, then another point, that terminology is not good, right? Like it could be like, oh, it's okay to use minority. Now it's not okay to use minority, right? At one point we heard underrepresentation, and then some people are like, no, we don't want to use underrepresentation. And then in the last 2.5 years, it's been, BIPOC, right? Black, Indigenous, and people of color, right? So it's like, now it's like some people are like, no, you can't use it, right? So like, it just changes all the time. And I think the opportunity here is not that you're keeping up on whatever the latest lingo are, whatever the latest thing is. It's that if you're versed in it, you're making the updates that's appropriate, but it's also important how you're coming alongside those that you are working with that are underrepresented or historically marginalized to make sure that their voices are represented. And I think that's the piece that differentiates us, where we know for sure that we're going to learn along the way as we're working with our partners, and what they bring forward to us will allow us to make the changes, and we'll take ownership and we'll say, oh my gosh, we're so sorry, right? Like, here's another example where we were working with the school, and we did a culture and climate survey, and in the survey we had a typo in one of the question. It said transgendered. It had an ED on it instead of transgender. And when we were doing all of our review, we missed it and it went public. And the student group called it out, and they called it out multiple times, right? And yes, as a consultant, you know, when you're trusted, you want to make sure that you're doing a great job. When we got the remark, like, it felt the weight for me. I was like, oh my gosh, how did we miss this, right? Like, but we took ownership. We said, we're so sorry. Like, that wasn't done intentionally, right? But it's one of those things that I think it helps us stay grounded, that we're working in collaboration, in partnership with the partners in the community that hire us, but more importantly, also the individuals within those communities that might be historically marginalized, for them to be able to also express and engage with us in a way that is authentic, so then we can represent them. Because a lot of the partners that we work with, those communities and the folks that are historically marginalized already are coming from a deficit in terms of their ability to fully advocate for themselves. There might not
100%.
even be a space for them to do so. Then along the organization that's coming in to potentially help improve it, what would happen when we cross them out, right? Mm-hmm. What happens when we end up being combative or defensive to say, oh, we can't be politically correct on everything, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a balance. It really is a balance. So thank you for being able to provide those examples, Millie. Okay, so the other topic that we had, and I'm going to turn to my colleague Victoria here. I'm just curious from you, right? With some of the partners that we work with, some of the stuff is heavy, right? It takes a lot of emotional reflection, emotional impact, right? Where some partners that we're working with, the communities that they are bringing us to work with, are historically marginalized, sometimes historically under-resourced. So in our engagement, we get to see those things at real time and are impacted by, and sometimes, yes, we're neutral, but sometimes it's hard to not feel the impact. So what does DMC team do to recalibrate, to refresh, to feel grounded? So I'm curious from you, being fairly new, but also seeing it at full speed, right? At the whole gamut. What has it been for you to reground yourself in some of the different things that the work that we're doing?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And first off, when you walk into a situation, something I try to remind myself, I'm not a math major. I'll preface with that is, people are variables and part of a formula that is always constantly changing. No matter how much I know, no matter how much, there's always space to learn and there's always that space to change. And the more that I go on with that mindset, that's a variable mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset, the more open I can be and the more that I can hear. And there are some stories that are incredibly emotional. Most recently, one of the visits was dealing with housing insecure and hearing, stories. And I think that too, we, sometimes we get this idea of what an under-resourced or underrepresented community looks like, or we know. And that's the thing, is we don't know. And that's the beauty and the importance of going and visiting partners and building that connection. Because I don't know somebody's experience, and even my experience, it's different from maybe somebody else's experience that might have the same background. Like Millie and I might both have very different experiences as women of color. So we have those connections, but there's variances. And so, thinking of this visit, it felt like I was looking in a mirror. It was so powerful. It was so powerful to know that, this person who was experiencing this housing insecurity, this kind of life crisis, just had one, rough month. And like, that's something like I can relate to, and I can feel like, oh, okay, one rough month, and I, maybe a loss of a job, maybe, something with rent going up, maybe a breakup, those sort of things that happen in life as life is constantly changing. And so it was really emotional. And I think when you walk in, you have to kind of like put things on a shelf. But then something that I appreciate is we're human. We accept that we are all human working here, and we're working with other humans, and that there's space created to feel those. That we might have times where we go into work with a partner, that we have to box it, that we have to really be focused, but then always having that space to come back and recalibrate. I mean, I personally love to come in here. There's plants, there's grounding, there's breath work, there's a lot of things to do, but not running away from those feelings and feeling them, I think just makes a greater connection and really empowers, at least for me, to be like, this is why I do what I do, and this is why I get up and come here every day, because it's real.
One of the things that I wanted to touch on was that the importance of piggybacking on what Victoria was saying, being able to acknowledge the feelings, right? Yes, when we're coming in, it's working with various partners, especially if the situation might be challenging and tough in what we're witnessing and viewing based on the conditions of the life and the situation that the community is in, it's hard to not feel the emotional impact of what you're seeing. And, there's a thing in like social work where it's like compassion fatigue, right? But for us, it's DMC, the culture that we're trying to create for the work is to make sure that we create space for each other to be able to reflect, because we can't just bypass what we have witnessed or experienced, even though it's not about the emotions behind what we're doing, but it helps to move away from the concept to the reality of the impact that human beings are having, in order for us to help our partners better understand why it's important for them to focus on that particular area or that particular community, or potential solutions to the problems that's occurring. And one of the things that we do is we have a bi-weekly meeting where we meet and we give updates on projects that we're working on and different work we're working on, but we also always create the space for people to provide feedback on how they're doing personally. And that's just, we've been very intentional to set the tone for that. And then also we have a Slack team that's where we communicate. It's a messaging system, and we have different themes in our Slack. So like at any time, if there's a red flag, someone can flag and say, hey, I need a breather. Oh, I need to go for a walk. Hey, I need to break this down with somebody. And that's really important, because in the consultant space, you don't get to see that back end, right? You just see the folks that come in. And a lot of times as consultants, there's a lot of negative feelings that people might have behind an initiative, because their organization has attempted to do these things over and over again, and nothing has ever come from it. So then you come in again, some of the feelings and emotions people might have towards you, they might not be that welcoming to you. And for us, it's really important to know that, again, it's not about us, right? If people are skeptical, then we elevate those emotions and feelings back to the partner that's bringing us, to let them know, hey, people are skeptical. Here's the reason why. But then again, coming back to our goal and our mission, why are we here? Excuse me. We're here because there's an opportunity for a positive change to happen that can transform the lives of people.
100%. And
our goal is to walk alongside the community that we're tasked to work with, but also the partner that's hiring us to bring us. And that's what grounds us. And at any time when we feel like there's a disalignment, then we need to kind of come together and evaluate, hey, does this make sense? Are we still on the right path here? But it is very important that the being, right, which is the internal feelings and emotions that you have around the work, and then the doing, which is what you actually do, to align and to have that safe space. So we hope in this new podcast, Community Success, that we provide insight of what it is the work that we're doing, but not just the work itself from like, oh, we accomplished this, we changed this, we helped people allocate this resources, but to understand the ins and outs of what we learn as we're doing the work. So
we walk alongside each other.
100%, you know. So for your last kind of giveaway to our audience and our listener, what is community success to you? There's different communities where we're part of, right? Extracurriculum, or community at work, community where we live, so many different communities. If you go to church, if you don't go to church. But when you think about community success, what is it for you, Millie? How do you define that for you? And what is it for you?
I guess thinking of it in so many different communities that we're all a part of, I would say that when a community is successful is when majority of the individuals that are part of the community have a voice in there, and that actions are taken to actually amplify and elevate that community in a way that each individual is able to partake into it. So I guess in a sense it's the equity and inclusion in that community is effective and in process.
Great. Thank you for that, Millie. And we're going to go to Victoria. What is community to you?
What is community, or the
community success?
Oh,
right.
Community success. So community success to me is that ripple effect, that effect of like whatever it's resource, love, laughter, joy, like those things that are enhancing a person's life is the ability to expand it and give to others, and then they're going to give to others and others and others, and it's that ripple effect of it can just really expand in a limitless kind of way. But it has to start somewhere. Like the ripple has to start. And so I think that that's some of the success that I see in our partners, and some of the success that I've seen in the community and the people we're working with is that they're starting those ripples, and those ripples keep getting bigger and bigger. And that's very exciting and inspiring.
Great. Well, thank you so much to my amazing colleague, Millie and Victoria, for joining me on this podcast. And we are so excited for future conversation we're going to have. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want some of the nice nuggets that we're giving out. But again, community success is a representation of everyone. We make up the community, and it shouldn't be limited based on what you have or what you look like and what your preferences are. It's important to be able to come alongside each other and admit that we don't know what we don't know in order for us to be open to learn. So thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thanks.